In just 48 hours, my daughter-in-law managed to blow through every penny of my late husband's inheritance. The court froze everything, but the damage was already done. My name is Carolyn Williams, and I'm 63 years old. I never thought I'd find myself telling this story, but here I am. I had always been a devoted wife and mother, raised my son Mark with everything I had, and poured love into my family. After my husband John passed away, I thought things would calm down. I thought I'd have the chance to grieve, to heal, and maybe finally enjoy the fruits of our hard work. But that's not what happened. Instead, I learned a painful truth about the people I trusted the most. The inheritance John left me wasn't just meant for me. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a safety net. I had plans. Small things at first, maybe fix up the house a bit, finally take a long-needed vacation. I imagined spending time with Mark, even though he'd been busy with his own life and his wife Sarah. Oh, I could never have imagined how much things would change because of her. It all started so innocently. Mark came by after the funeral and we talked. He assured me that everything was fine, that the money would help me, that I'd be taken care of. He told me not to worry, that things would work out. I believed him, of course. He's my son. What mother wouldn't? But what I didn't know was that Sarah had already made her plans. The money wasn't even in my hands yet before I started noticing strange things. Mark stopped visiting as often. Sarah grew cold, almost distant. I didn't want to admit it, but I started feeling like an outsider in my own family. The inheritance wasn't just supposed to be for me, it was meant to be a gift for all of us. But it wasn't long before I started hearing rumors. First a little whisper here and there, then a comment from Sarah. "I think we should use the inheritance for something more practical," she said one day, just casually. First I brushed it off. But then I started paying attention, and the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. She had already spent it. All of it. And it wasn't for anything practical. It was for luxuries, clothes, vacations, things she didn't need. I felt my world crumble. How could she do this to me, to John's memory, to everything we had worked for? The court got involved, freezing the accounts, but by then the damage was done. I couldn't believe it. The betrayal stung more than I could ever put into words. The worst part? Mark didn't even see what was happening. I had trusted him, but now I felt like he was just another pawn in her game. My heart was broken, but I wasn't going to let it go that easily. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to stand by and let Sarah get away with this. Not now, not ever. The days following John's funeral were a blur. I couldn't help but feel like I was walking through life in a daze, everything moving around me while I stayed frozen in place. I'd spent over 30 years building a life with John. We had worked hard to create a home, raise our son Mark, and build a future together. But now, with him gone, I felt the weight of that absence in every room, in every quiet moment. Mark came by occasionally, but it wasn't the same. There was always a distant look in his eyes, a heaviness in his tone. I noticed Sarah had become more withdrawn too. She was always polite, but there was something cold in her demeanor. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just the stress of everything. I thought maybe they were grieving like me, but I was wrong. It wasn't until I started seeing the subtle changes that I began to suspect something wasn't right. Mark had always been close to me, but now he was pulling away, leaving more and more decisions to Sarah. She was always the one to handle the finances now, always the one to make the calls. One day, I overheard a conversation between them. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words hit me like a slap to the face. "We should move forward with the renovations," Sarah said. "I've already made the payments with the inheritance." I felt the blood drain from my face. Inheritance? The money John had left for me was already gone, spent on things that had nothing to do with what I'd planned. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I held back. I didn't want to cause a scene, but the feeling of betrayal was suffocating. I spent the next few days quietly looking through the documents, trying to understand what had happened. I found receipts, transfers, purchases. Everything was gone, and not a single penny was used for the things I had planned. Not a single penny was used to help me get by, to help me rebuild my life after losing John. I didn't know what hurt more, losing my husband or losing the trust of my son and his wife. The more I dug, the more I realized how deeply I'd been deceived. This wasn't just a careless mistake. This was deliberate. Sarah had used the inheritance like it was hers to spend, And Mark had turned a blind eye. The pain of it all was almost too much to bear. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just let this slide. I had to do something. I wasn't going to be a silent victim in my own life. I had worked too hard to be treated like this, and I wasn't going to let Sarah and Mark get away with it. It was time to take control of what was rightfully mine. The days after I found out were the hardest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been taken from me. Not just my husband, but my dignity, my trust in the family I had built. I was no longer the person I had been. I had been the one everyone relied on, the strong one, the one who always had the answers. Now I felt small, invisible, as if my life no longer mattered. But I wasn't going to let this define me. I started making calls. I reached out to a lawyer, hoping they could help me make sense of this nightmare. The more I learned about the legal process, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect. I wasn't going to let Sarah take everything from me without facing consequences. I knew the court could freeze the accounts, but it wouldn't undo the damage she had caused. I needed more than that. I needed to make sure she understood what she had done, that she couldn't just walk all over me. Not after everything I had sacrificed. The lawyer explained that the inheritance could be contested, and that gave me a sliver of hope. I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew I had to fight. As the days passed, I watched Mark and Sarah grow more distant. Mark seemed to be slipping away, too caught up in his life to notice the hole that was growing between us. It wasn't just the money. It was the trust that had been broken. I wanted to talk to him, to ask him why he let this happen, but every time I tried, I saw the same look in his eyes, the look of someone who had already made up their mind. He wasn't on my side. He was on Sarah's side. That realization hit harder than I could have imagined. I spent so many years raising him, doing everything I could to give him a good life, and now he was siding with her. I felt betrayed, but I couldn't let that stop me. I wasn't going to just give up and let them win. I had been quiet for too long. It was time to take back control of my life, and I wasn't going to do it alone. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was bigger than just one betrayal. It was about reclaiming my power, my life, and my future. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. This was just the beginning. The next few days were filled with an uneasy silence. I spent my time at home, pacing back and forth, looking over the papers, trying to find a way to fix what had been broken. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to do this on my own. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I reached out to my lawyer, a woman named Susan who had helped me with some small matters in the past. She was sharp, smart, and more importantly, she understood the emotional side of things. She didn't just see this as a case about money. She saw it as a fight for what was right. Susan reviewed the documents and confirmed my worst fears. The inheritance had been spent, every penny of it. But more than that, she told me there were ways to fight back. The law wasn't going to be on Sarah's side just because she was married to Mark. There were ways to contest the spending, and we could prove that Sarah had misused the funds. The legal battle would be difficult, but it was a battle I was ready to fight. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me when Susan spoke those words. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally doing something. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about making sure Sarah understood that she couldn't just take what wasn't hers and get away with it. I was a mother, a grandmother, and I had spent my life working for everything I had. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me without a fight. As the legal proceedings started, I began to notice something strange. Mark wasn't as distant as he had been before. He started calling more often, coming by to visit. But I wasn't fooled. I could see the guilt in his eyes, and I could feel the tension in the air when he walked into the room. It was like he was trying to make up for something. But the truth was, nothing could undo the damage that had been done. Every time I looked at him, I saw a man who had chosen sides, who had allowed his wife to control everything. He didn't even know the full extent of what Sarah had done, and he wouldn't, not until I was ready to show him. I wasn't sure when the right time would be, but I knew I was getting closer. The truth was coming out, slowly but surely, and nothing could stop it. The more I learned, the more I realized how much Sarah had underestimated me. She thought she could take everything from me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I was done being silent. I was done being the victim. This was just the beginning. As the legal process unfolded, I began to see the cracks in Sarah's facade. Mark, who had once been so distant, was now showing signs of guilt, and his attitude towards me had changed. It was subtle at first. He would call more frequently, asking if I needed anything, and even came over to help with small tasks around the house. But I wasn't fooled. His actions spoke louder than his words, and the guilt was written all over his face. I knew he was trying to make up for what had happened, but it didn't change anything. He had allowed Sarah to manipulate him, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. My heart ached for him, for the son I had raised, but I also knew that he had to face the consequences of his actions. I couldn't protect him from the truth forever. One afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Mark in the living room. The air between us was thick with tension, and for the first time in a long while I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who used to sit on my lap and tell me everything. But now he was a man, and the distance between us was undeniable. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, "I know I've let you down. I should have seen what was happening, but I was too blinded by everything else." I looked at him, my heart breaking, but I kept my composure. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't just about what happened. This is about trust. This is about how Sarah took everything from me, and how you allowed it to happen." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I know," he whispered. "I know. But I didn't know what to do. I thought I was doing what was best." I shook my head. Doing what was best would have been standing by me, Mark. Not letting her take everything. It was the first real conversation we'd had in weeks, and even though it didn't solve everything, it felt like a step towards understanding. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him completely, but I was willing to try. The next day I got a call from my lawyer. There had been a breakthrough in the case. Sarah had been served with a legal notice, and the court was finally taking action. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally getting some justice. Sarah wasn't going to get away with this, not after everything she had done. I was no longer the silent victim. I was taking back my life piece by piece, and nothing was going to stop me. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, my peace of mind, and the respect that I deserved. The day Sarah received the legal notice, I could see the change in her. At first, she tried to put on a calm face, but it didn't last. She called Mark immediately, her voice sharp and demanding. I didn't need to hear their conversation to know what was happening. I could feel it in the tension that hung in the air. Sarah was finally realizing that I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. The next few days were filled with back and forth phone calls and emails with my lawyer. But in the midst of all that, something unexpected happened. Mark came to visit me again. This time he didn't try to make excuses. He didn't pretend like everything was okay. He came to talk, to finally face the truth. I saw him standing at the door looking hesitant, almost like a child again. "Mom," he said softly, stepping inside. "I know I can't change what happened, but I need you to know I'm sorry." My heart wavered. He was finally taking responsibility for what he had allowed to happen. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was what I needed to hear. I didn't want to feel angry anymore. I didn't want to feel betrayed. But the truth was, I still did. "Mark, I've spent my whole life giving everything for this family. For you. For your happiness. But Sarah, she crossed a line. And you allowed it to happen. I can't just forget that," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was torn. He looked at me with sorrowful eyes. "I know. I should have been there for you. I should have stood up for you, and I didn't. I failed you." There was a long silence between us. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible. I wasn't even sure if I wanted it. But as I looked at him, I realized something. He was still my son, and maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but I wasn't giving up on him completely. The lawyer called again. There was another update. This time it was good news. Sarah's misuse of the inheritance had been made public. The court had issued a temporary ruling, freezing the rest of the assets until further investigation. It wasn't over yet, but it was a victory. A small one, but it was a start. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about making sure that no one could take advantage of me, of my family, without facing the consequences. And I wasn't done yet. There was still a long road ahead, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let Sarah or anyone else take anything from me again. This was my fight, and I was finally ready to win. As the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. The once confident, arrogant woman who had so easily taken control of everything was now visibly rattled. She started avoiding me more, and when she did speak to me, there was a nervous edge to her tone. Mark, on the other hand, seemed torn. He came by often, trying to make amends, but his guilt was so palpable it made every conversation feel heavy. I wasn't sure if he was sorry for what had happened or for getting caught. Part of me wanted to believe that he was truly regretful, but another part of me couldn't ignore the fact that he had allowed all of this to happen. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about trust, and that was something hard to rebuild. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room going over papers, Mark walked in. His face was tense, but there was something different in his eyes, determination maybe. He sat down across from me and spoke without hesitation. "Mom, I want to help fix this. I know I can't change what's been done, but I want to make it right. I want to prove that I'm still your son and that I'm on your side." His words caught me off guard. After everything, I hadn't expected him to be so direct, so determined, but there was something about the way he said it, something that made me believe he was finally starting to see the full extent of what Sarah had done. I looked at him for a long time, weighing his words carefully. "Mark," I said slowly, "I don't know if I can just forget what's happened. It's not just about the money. It's about how you let Sarah take everything from me. But I'm willing to listen. If you're really serious about making things right, then prove it." He nodded without saying a word, as if he understood that action spoke louder than words. I could see the resolve in his eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and effort from both of us. As I watched him leave that day, I realized something. No matter what happened with Sarah, no matter how much the court decided, I still had a family to hold on to. And I wasn't ready to give up on it just yet. The months that followed were a mixture of small victories and bitter realizations. Sarah never fully accepted what had happened, but she could no longer deny that the inheritance was under scrutiny. Mark continued to visit, though his attempts to make things right were often met with cold silence from Sarah. It was clear she was losing control, and with each passing day, the facade she had built began to crumble. I continued to focus on what mattered, my own peace, my own dignity. I spent time with friends, worked on small projects around the house, and allowed myself to breathe. But the battle wasn't over. The court proceedings took longer than expected, and I found myself constantly wondering if this fight was really worth it. Would I ever get back the trust I'd lost? Would things ever be the same with Mark? There were days when I felt like I had won, when the weight of everything finally seemed manageable, but other days, when I caught a glimpse of Sarah's cold stare, it felt like I was still fighting an uphill battle. Then one day Mark called. His voice was different. He wasn't apologizing anymore, he wasn't trying to fix things. He was telling me something. "Mom," he said, "I know you want justice, but I think we've gone as far as we can. The courts are taking too long, and Sarah is still digging in her heels. Maybe it's time we move forward with our lives." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I couldn't speak. This wasn't what I wanted to hear. This wasn't the resolution I had imagined. But as I sat there, I realized that maybe he was right. Maybe the battle wasn't worth losing myself over. Maybe the best thing for me was to finally let go. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about finding peace, finding the strength to forgive and move on. "Mark," I finally said, my voice steady, "you're right. I've fought hard, but I don't want to lose what's left of us. I'm ready to let go." He didn't say anything at first, but I could hear the relief in his silence. Over the next few weeks we settled everything in court. Sarah's actions were addressed, but I knew that the resolution didn't have to come with hatred. Could come with understanding, with acceptance. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. I was ready to move on. As the days passed, Mark and I rebuilt our relationship, slowly but surely. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I knew that no matter what happened, I had done everything I could to fight for my family, for myself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. After everything that had happened, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The months of court battles, emotional strain, and broken trust had finally led to a place where I could breathe again. But it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like closure. There were moments when I caught myself staring at the old family photos around the house, remembering the good times, the simpler times. Times when we were a family. Times when everything seemed right. But those moments felt like they were from another life now. Sarah, Mark, the inheritance, everything had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been before. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about Sarah's betrayal. It was about me finding a new way forward. A way to rebuild the life I had once imagined. Mark continued to visit, and over time we began to heal. Slowly, he started to understand the weight of everything I had gone through. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but we were moving forward. There were days when I still felt angry when the past would creep in, and I would remember what had been taken from me. But I didn't let those feelings control me anymore. I had learned to let go, to accept that I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. One evening, as we sat together over coffee, Mark looked at me with a sincerity I hadn't seen in a long time. "Mom, I'm really sorry for everything. I know I can't undo what happened, but I just want you to know I'm here. I want to be the son you deserve." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had waited so long to hear them, but now that they were finally here, I wasn't sure what to do with them. All I could do was nod, silently accepting his apology, silently accepting that we both had to move forward. "I know, Mark," I said quietly. "And I'm here too. It's going to take time, but we'll get there." For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were working towards something better. Something real. The days ahead were uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. I wasn't going to be defined by the betrayal, by the loss, or by the pain. I was going to be defined by my strength, by my ability to move forward, and by the family I still had left. And that in itself was enough. As the months passed, I could feel the weight of everything slowly lifting off my shoulders. The legal battle, the anger, the heartbreak. It was all still there, but it didn't consume me anymore. I had taken back control of my life, and that meant more to me than anything. Mark and I continued to rebuild our relationship slowly but surely. There were times when I found myself looking at him, remembering the little boy who used to sit on my lap, laughing, telling me about his day. That boy felt so far away now, replaced by a man who had made mistakes, but who was trying to make them right. It wasn't easy, and we both knew it would take time, but I could see the effort in his eyes. He was trying, and that, in itself, was something worth holding on to. Sarah, however, had never truly faced the consequences of her actions. While the court had intervened, I knew that some things couldn't be fixed by legal rulings alone. What she had done to our family was irreparable. But I also knew that holding on to that anger would only continue to hurt me. It wasn't easy, but I let it go. I decided that I wasn't going to let her define my happiness. My life was mine to live, and I wasn't going to let the actions of others take that away from me. As time went on, I found peace in the small moments. Morning coffee with Mark, Sunday dinners where we could talk, laugh, and begin to heal. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living again, not just surviving. I didn't need the inheritance. I didn't need Sarah's approval. What I needed was to find joy in the people who still loved me, in the family that still cared. I was more than what I had lost. I was more than what had been taken from me. I was stronger than I had ever known. And I wasn't going to let anyone or anything take that away. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever it brought. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced the hardest challenges of my life and come out stronger. And nothing was going to change that. It had been a few months since the court ruling, and life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once filled with tension, now felt quieter, calmer. Mark and I were still working on rebuilding our relationship, one conversation at a time. There were still bumps along the way, of course. The past didn't just vanish. But we had made progress, and that meant something. We had both learned the hard way about what truly mattered. For me, it wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't the money. What I had learned through this whole ordeal was the value of trust, of loyalty, and of family. I had learned that no amount of wealth could replace the love and respect that should come from those closest to you. The real victory was not in the financial settlements, but in the small everyday moments where we began to understand each other again. I watched Mark as he tried to make amends. He didn't always get it right, but I could see that he was trying. That was enough for me. It wasn't about perfection, it was about effort, about showing up, about being present. Sarah, however, was a different story. The legal consequences of her actions were still unfolding. I had done what I needed to do to ensure that she didn't get away with what she had done. But as the days went by, I realized that I didn't need to continue dwelling on her. I didn't need her to apologize or make things right. I had moved on. The truth was I was finally free. Free from the anger, free from the betrayal. I had spent so much time focusing on what Sarah had taken from me, but now I saw the truth. She hadn't taken anything that really mattered. What mattered was still here. My life, my strength, my ability to love and forgive. I had found a new sense of peace, one that wasn't dependent on anyone else's actions or approval. My heart had healed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The future still held uncertainty, but it no longer scared me. I had faced the worst and come through stronger, and nothing could take that away from me. It was time to live again, to embrace the days ahead, and to cherish the family I still had. The journey wasn't over, but I was no longer walking it alone. It was a quiet morning when I woke up, the sun just starting to peek through the curtains. It was a simple moment, but for some reason it felt different. The weight that had once been a constant in my life, resentment, anger, fear, was now gone. I could breathe easily, something I hadn't been able to do for months. Life had a way of teaching you lessons, even when you weren't ready to learn them. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to the past, trying to fight for what had been taken from me. But in the end, I realized that the real victory wasn't in reclaiming what I had lost. It was in learning how to move forward, how to forgive, how to let go. Mark had been making strides, showing up for me in ways I hadn't expected. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was better. It was real. And that was all I could ask for. He had made mistakes, but he was trying, and for the first time I felt like he was truly listening to me. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that it was ours to walk together. The road wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about rebuilding, about healing. I had let go of Sarah's actions, not because I wanted to forget what she had done, but because holding on to that anger was only hurting me. She would never get the satisfaction of knowing she had controlled my life. No, that power was mine now. It always had been. I had reclaimed that power by choosing to move forward, to create a future where I wasn't weighed down by the past. My days were no longer clouded by what Sarah had done or what I had lost. They were filled with small moments, quiet moments, the kind of moments I had long forgotten. Time with Mark, time to reflect, time to breathe. It felt like I was finally living again. The journey wasn't over. I had come a long way, but I still had more to go. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future might bring. I had faced the storm, and now I was ready for the calm. I knew now that my strength didn't come from what I had, or what I had lost. It came from the choices I made, from how I moved forward no matter what happened. And that was all I needed.